Today you will learn the shocking story of a renowned pastor who died for a few moments and saw something frightening about the church and her own faith. What she witnessed completely changed her life, and it could change yours too. Before we start, comment here from which city you are watching, and, if you are not yet subscribed, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos like this. I'm Lyrica Wainwright, and today I decide to share a story that I never imagined having to tell. I have been a pastor for over 15 years in one of the largest congregations in Chicago, and my image has always been associated with strength, unshakable faith, and charismatic leadership. However, this narrative is not about the impeccable life many believe I lived. It is about my fall, about the day when, at the height of my career, I was confronted with a truth that shattered all the certainties I had about myself and about God. I have always been seen as a pillar of confidence and spiritual guidance, but I never believed that one day I would need to expose my flaws and doubts. Despite the respect I received, I never wrote books or participated in lectures telling my story. I kept my life private, reserved only for moments of silent prayer and intimate reflection. But there are times when the silence becomes unbearable, and the burden of guilt and regret cries out to be shared. I remember an ordinary morning, before Sunday service, when the sun timidly began to illuminate the city of Chicago, painting the clouds with shades of orange and pink. I was preparing my sermon with the conviction that the message of hope and redemption would be the anchor that many needed that day. As I reviewed my texts, I heard my own voice echo in thoughts. Lyrica, you are about to preach the truth, even if it hurts. That simple sentence already foreshadowed what was to come. On the way to the church, as I crossed the busy streets, I could feel the pulse of the city and the mix of faith and skepticism that permeated every corner. In each face I saw a story, a struggle, a yearning for something greater. I arrived at church with a racing heart, but convinced that God was guiding me. Upon entering the sanctuary, I felt the weight of the attentive eyes and expectations placed on me. During the service, as I preached, a wave of emotions invaded my being. My heart, previously so steady, began to beat wildly. In a moment of introspection, almost in a whisper, I said to myself, am I really serving God's purpose, or just feeding my ego? This doubt, silent and bitter, accompanied every word spoken in that pulpit, but it never revealed itself to the eyes of the congregation. After the service, as I greeted the faithful and listened to their thanks, I realized that behind the smiles and hands raised in prayer, there was also a feeling of search, of need for truth. Maybe they too were at a crossroads, just like me. Today, in reporting this story, I do not seek redemption through fame or the rehabilitation of my name. I just want you to understand that faith is a complex journey, full of moments of light and shadow. My experience is not an example of perfection, but a call to reflection so that each of us questions whether, amidst so many routines and appearances, we are truly connected with the divine. On that fateful afternoon, the weather seemed to foretell something out of the ordinary. The service was packed, and the atmosphere was one of fervor and hope. I, Lyrica Wainwright, was in the pulpit, dressed in my usual attire, trying to convey security and conviction. As my voice echoed through the church halls, I noticed a pang in my chest that, at first, I dismissed as a mere passing discomfort. However, as I progressed in preaching, that feeling intensified, as if an invisible force was squeezing my heart with silent violence. My brothers and sisters today, I speak to you about the light that guides us even in darkness. My words sounded firm, but inside, a whirlwind of doubts and discomfort was forming. During these moments, an internal voice insisted, "Pay attention, Lyrica. Something is not right." I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the accumulated stress of responsibilities, but the feeling grew overwhelming. As the service continued, the discomfort became a torment that could no longer be ignored. In an instant that seemed to dilate time, I felt as if my chest was being compressed by invisible hands. A tremor ran through my body, and my lips curled into a grimace of pain that no one could notice behind the fervor of the service. I tried to maintain my composure, but the intensity of the pain began to steal the power from my words. God, forgive me, I muttered to myself as the feeling turned into a silent storm. The congregation, until then absorbed in my words, began to notice something out of the ordinary. Some eyes turned my way, filled with concern, while others wondered if I was losing control. The sensation intensified with each second, and my vision began to blur. I remember trying to lean on the pulpit, seeking stability, but I soon realized that something much deeper was happening. The pain, which was already excruciating, completely took over my consciousness. In an instant of silent terror, I lost my balance and fell, collapsing in the middle of the pulpit. The sound of the impact echoed through the church, and for a brief moment, chaos ensued. Voices rose in despair as members of the congregation rushed to my aid. The last image I had before succumbing to the darkness was that of the worried face of Nathaniel Carter, my friend and spiritual advisor, who was approaching with hurried steps, his voice filled with disbelief. Lyrica, please hang in there, we are here! The scene that unfolded next was a blur of sounds, flashing lights and disjointed screams. The sacred environment, which until then was a temple of faith, became a scene of panic and confusion. As my eyes closed and consciousness struggled to maintain itself, I felt a strange separation, as if my soul began to detach from my body. This feeling, at once distressing and inexplicable, opened the way to a new state, where the physical and the spiritual seemed to merge into a single dimension. At that moment, something profound and unnameable happened. The chest pain was not just a physical symptom, but a harbinger of the truth that would soon reveal itself. And even as darkness took over, part of me remained alert, witnessing the scene like a helpless spectator. This was the beginning of a journey that would challenge not only my faith, but the entire essence of what I believed to be my life's true purpose. As darkness began to envelop my senses, something inexplicable happened. I felt as if my essence had detached from my body, and there I was, floating above the sacred stage, observing everything with disturbing clarity. My body lay motionless on the pulpit, surrounded by frightened looks and outstretched hands that tried, in vain, to bring it back to life. I, Lyrica, was trapped in a parallel reality, where time seemed suspended. This can't be happening, I thought, as my mind struggled to comprehend the surreal scene. Although I was conscious, I could not move or make a sound. It was as if an invisible barrier separated me from all my physical faculties. As the murmurs and muffled screams echoed through the church, my perception deepened into details I had never noticed before. I could see the restless gleam in Nathaniel Carter's eyes as he desperately tried to reach me. Their gestures became distorted echoes of a world that no longer seemed real. Floating in that kind of limbo, I tried to move. I wanted to communicate something, but the paralysis was absolute. Every time my thoughts cried out for action, they crashed into the invisible barrier, leaving me in a state of helplessness. The environment around me also changed. The church, which a few moments ago was a temple of faith and congregation, now appeared as a distant scene, as if it were being observed from the outside through a distorted lens. Lyrica, answer me! Lyrica! Nathaniel's voice, almost anguished, resounded, but it arrived as a diluted whisper, unable to penetrate the barrier that trapped me. I wanted to respond, to beg them to bring me back, but my words were trapped in an impenetrable silence. Meanwhile, the perception of the environment intensified. Vibrant colors mixed with unsettling shadows and sounds intertwined in a continuous hum that seemed to contain ancient secrets. At least I could notice the details of the body itself. It was stretched out, its contours marked by the faint light of the spotlight, and, in a way, it looked like a scene from a horror film, but without the comfort of a fictional narrative. I saw every detail, the traces of concern on my face, the tension in my shoulders, even the small nervous gestures of those who approached to try to revive my body. Everything registered in my mind like a painting of brutal realism. As time dragged on, a feeling of desolation began to set in. I saw myself as so distant, as if I had lost the connection with the very essence that defined me. In a moment of pure introspection, I silently questioned, who am I, if I am not this body, if I am not this voice that is now suspended? These questions echoed unanswered, plunging me even further into the anguish of the separation between the physical and the spiritual. It was at that moment that perception began to change. The voices in the background, previously confused and distorted, began to organize themselves into a murmur that suggested a deeper message, as if the universe was trying to convey something vital to me. However, everything remained in a disconcerting limbo, leaving me at the mercy of sensations and thoughts that could not find a defined direction. As darkness began to envelop my consciousness, I felt reality transform into something I could never have imagined. From the moment I stopped noticing the physical environment of the church, I saw the walls and pews slowly dissolving, replaced by a space where light and shadow mixed in an almost palpable way. It was as if I had stepped through an invisible portal into a realm where the rules of time and matter did not apply. As I floated in that boundless void, I noticed that the lights that had once illuminated the church were now distorting, turning into undulating beams of vibrant colors that danced in a hypnotic rhythm. The sounds, previously clear and separate, blended into a continuous hum that carried a tone of melancholy and mystery. In the midst of this metamorphosis, I heard whispers that seemed to come from everywhere, soft voices that chanted my name, but also expressed words that I couldn't fully understand. Ah, Lyrica, Lyrica. The murmurs echoed, as if the universe itself wanted to call me to a new understanding of existence. I tried with all my strength to move in this new dimension, but a feeling of total paralysis prevented me from acting. It was as if I were trapped in a cocoon, observing every detail with a clarity that was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. My gaze wandered between dissolving and reconstructing shapes, each contour hinting at the presence of something beyond what the eye could see. It was then that I realized the nature of the transformation. The church had completely disappeared, replaced by an environment that resembled a vast expanse of shadows and light. The walls of that new space were made of dense, almost liquid darkness, where the nuances of black and gray blended into a scene of unsettling beauty. The ground seemed to float beneath my ethereal feet, and the feeling was that I did not belong here, but that it belonged to a higher, unknown truth. The sounds, which before were just hums, began to transform into a distant choir, as if a multitude of voices were singing ancient songs, full of wisdom and lament. In the midst of this transformation, a presence began to make itself known. It was not a clearly defined figure, but a dense energy that enveloped every particle of that space. The presence made me feel accompanied, however, in a way that went beyond any known comfort. As I tried to decipher the meaning of this scenario, a deep, resonant voice rose above the continuous drone. You have been taken beyond what your eyes can see, Lyrica. Here, hidden truths are revealed and the secrets of existence are revealed. The voice seemed to come from every direction, echoing in my mind and challenging me to question every belief I had built throughout my life. I felt an intense cold, not just physical, but something that reached the depths of my soul, as if every cell of my being was being reconfigured by the presence of that place. As the intensity of that experiment increased, the scene around me continued to transform. The wavering lights grew more intense, and the whispers now carried a sad but deeply revealing melody. It was as if the universe was inviting me to abandon certainties and face the raw essence of my existence. Every sensation, every sound, every shift in that spiritual realm led me to a new and disturbing understanding. What I had always considered faith and certainty was about to be redefined by the truth that hid behind appearances. The gloom of that realm beyond the physical began to counter with an unmistakable and threatening force. I, Lyrica, who until then had observed everything with resigned calm, felt the abrupt change in the environment. A dense and dark presence made itself felt, surrounding me with its overwhelming energy. This entity did not seem to be merely an echo of my own doubts, but rather a force that had formed to confront me, to uncover the truths that I had long tried to ignore. "That you preached about God, but you never knew him," resounded an icy, sharp voice, which seemed to emerge from all directions. His words spread like sharp blades, each syllable eating away at the facade I had carefully constructed over the years. I was paralyzed by this verbal attack, unable to react or offer any defense. It was as if the very essence of my faith was being questioned and laid bare. As this accusation echoed, images of my life began to unfold before my eyes. Each memory, each decision was projected in a sequence that revealed the moments of pride and selfishness that marked my ministry. I found myself on several occasions trying to impress the congregation with fervent speeches, but in return, ignoring the cries of those in need. I saw the times I denied help to those in need, always under the pretext of maintaining an impeccable image and not out of a real commitment to compassion. "Lyrica," I murmured, trying unsuccessfully to regain some dignity. The dark voice continued to challenge me, now questioning the purpose of every word and every action. In a moment, I felt as if time froze, and the entity approached, almost physically, pressing on my spirit with an intensity I had never experienced. I was immersed in a confrontation that transcended the physical world, where there was no room for justifications or defenses. All that was left was the raw exposure of my failures. The environment seemed to pulse with the strength of that entity. The air became heavy, and the temperature dropped drastically, as if the air itself were freezing. In the midst of this chaos, I heard fragments of other voices, which seemed to come from forgotten souls in ages past, each whispering their own stories of pain and regret. The confrontation wasn't just with me, but with all the masks and illusions I allowed myself to wear. Every word that the presence spoke was a cruel reminder that true faith is not based on appearances or imposed rules, but on the sincerity of the heart. As the entity stood firm, its words intertwined with images from my past, creating an internal storm of regret and anguish. I was able to feel the weight of each wrong decision, and the dark voice became the cruel mirror that forced me to face the truth about my leadership. There was no refuge, no justification that could ease the pain of that confrontation. At that moment, I understood that spiritual clash was the prelude to an inevitable transformation. The shadow that challenged me was not just an adversary, but the materialization of everything I had avoided facing. With each word, each revelation, the barrier between what I believed and what I really was became thinner, and I inevitably found myself facing a point of no return. As the cutting words of that obscured presence echoed in my mind, I began to see, with painful clarity, images of my career as a pastor. In a whirlwind of memories, I realized that every step I took on the path to ministry had been shaped by a desire for approval and recognition. Now, in the relentless silence of this spiritual realm, my achievements and failures were laid bare, before my eyes, forcing me to face the truth I so denied. "You cared more about your image than true compassion," the dark voice repeated, transforming each memory into a devastating blow. I saw myself, not as the leader that many admired, but as someone who was seduced by power and influence. I remembered the countless services where, Instead of transmitting the essence of divine love, I boasted about my eloquent speeches. In my mind, memories crowded. Moments when I ignored calls for help. Moments when I prioritized maintaining a status that made me seem immune to human failings. In an almost cinematic vision, I came across scenes of meetings in which I refused to offer support to those in need, justifying my actions as part of a greater mission. One particularly painful image stood out: the face of a young man, hopeful and sincere, who rejected his desire to serve God. His look, full of innocence, contrasted with the arrogance I had adopted to maintain my authority. "You have never heard the cry of a sincere heart," murmured the presence, and at that moment, every silence and every look away in my meetings turned into scars that I tried to hide. As the memories accumulated, I came to realize that my approach, far from inspiring true faith, was permeated by an insatiable pride. There were moments when, in the crowd, I let myself be carried away by thoughts of superiority, forgetting that true ministry is based on humility and empathy. It was as if, in my desire to maintain an unshakable facade, I had alienated those who most needed guidance and comfort. The revelation hit me with the force of a gale, leaving me breathless and defenseless. The dark, implacable voice insisted, "You built your empire on empty appearances, Lyrica." These words reverberated in every cell of my being, revealing the distance between the ministry I preached and the ministry that should really be lived. The images continued to unfold, a succession of moments in which my authority turned into rigidity, where human rules overrode the teachings of love and mercy that I should transmit. The weight of guilt was unbearable. I realized that my conduct not only removed the true presence of God, but also harmed those who looked to me for an example of faith and compassion. Every mistake, every omission, now became a cruel mirror that reflected my own hypocrisy. Why didn't I let the love of Jesus guide my steps? Why did I allow pride to cover up the divine essence I promised to reveal? I questioned myself, feeling that each answer was insufficient for the magnitude of my error. In this state of vulnerability, I felt the weight of judgment not just from a dark entity, but from all the souls I had let down. The truth, so painful and merciless, imposed itself. My life and my ministry could never be justified by an impeccable image built on lies and ego. At the height of that spiritual confrontation, the weight of judgment crashed over me like an unrelenting storm. There, on the threshold between the physical and the spiritual, I felt the anguish of all my failures, the regret that had long been avoided. My being, already stripped of the masks that supported my authority, found myself facing an entity that did not spare harsh and truthful words. "Is there still time for you, Lyrica?" echoed my own voice, full of pain and disbelief, as I found myself on my knees before the presence that emanated condemnation and compassion simultaneously. The question seemed like a last plea, a cry for forgiveness that rose in the void of that limitless space. But the answer didn't take long to come, cold and definitive. A faint yet penetrating light illuminated the expanse in which it floated. It was as if an ancient energy had combined itself with my vulnerability, bringing to light the chance for redemption. However, soon another voice, colder and more cutting, interrupted any hope. "I never met you." Those words, which seemed to scratch my soul, resonated with a devastating intensity. Each syllable was a reminder that despite all my influence and grandiose speeches, my spiritual journey had never been genuine. I had built my ministry on appearances, maintaining a facade that never reflected the true love and humility that God required. At that moment, judgment seemed inevitable, and regret became my only solace. As silence settled in for a few moments, memories of decisive moments emerged with force. I saw the faces of those who, in their innocence, placed in me the trust and faith that I failed to cultivate. I remembered every denied request for help, every lost look from a young man looking for a mentor. These memories hit me with the force of a gale, transforming the environment into a court of consciences from which there was no escape. Forgive me, Lord, for having allowed my pride to obscure the light of your love, I murmured, my voice breaking, as if each word was a cry of repentance that tried, in vain, to soften the divine sentence. I felt the weight of each mistake, each failure, and the anguish of knowing that even with the possibility of redemption, the path would be arduous and without guarantees. At that exact moment, between the light that began to intensify and the darkness that insisted on enveloping me, I realized that I was at a crossroads. The dark voice, still cutting, seemed to offer one last chance, but the words of judgment continued to echo, making it clear that the change depended solely on me. The question, "Is there still time for me?" hung in the air, challenging me to recognize and accept the truth of my existence. The moment stretched on, dilated by time and full of meaning. The opportunity to redeem himself was not an easy gift. It was accompanied by a deep need for inner transformation, a renunciation of the pride and superficiality that had marked my trajectory so much. And when faced with this choice, I felt, for the first time, the true essence of repentance, not as a punishment, but as a path to starting over and reconnecting with the divine. In an instant that defied comprehension, I felt a sudden change in the air around me. As if the universe decided to give me one last chance, the darkness that enveloped me began to give way to a faint, comforting light. This light did not have the aggressive brightness that had once blinded me, but rather a gentle warmth that announced the return to what I knew, my physical body. I felt the weight, the touch, the firmness of my limbs, as if matter had finally regained the space that, until then, had been denied to me. I woke up in a hospital bed where the environment, although modest, radiated an uneasy calm. The white lights of the hallways, the monitors emitting rhythmic sounds, and the subtle smell of disinfectant were inescapable reminders of earthly reality. My chest, which moments before had been filled with pain and anguish, now pulsed with an irregular but palpable cadence. I felt each beat like a silent scream, a reaffirmation that I was still living, still breathing, still able to seek redemption. When I opened my eyes, I found the world in a fragmented and confused way. The hospital enveloped me in an embrace of harsh reality, brutally contrasting with the vastness of that spiritual realm. A nurse's delicate hands touched my arm, and her eyes, filled with concern, reflected both relief and fear of the inexplicable. I tried to speak, but my words came out in halting whispers, as if the simple act of forming a sentence was a titanic effort. "I'm alive," I murmured, barely able to articulate the surprise and fear that invaded my mind. In the midst of this new reality, the evil shadow that had accompanied me seemed to have followed me. I felt, almost palpably, that something was still watching me, as if the lessons had not been completely absorbed. Every beat of my heart was a reminder that even after such a transformative experience, the physical world did not forgive me easily. The transition was brutal and at the same time deeply symbolic. Returning to my body meant assuming again the fragility and imperfections that I had tried to hide for so long. The sight of medical equipment, syringes, and the watchful eyes of healthcare professionals brought me back to the harsh and sometimes unforgiving reality of everyday life. However, at that same moment, a whirlwind of feelings invaded me: regret, hope, and, above all, the urgent desire for a fresh start. As I lay in that hospital bed, my thoughts were intertwined with the memory of the transcendent experience. Every pain, every flash of awareness in the darkness seemed to have been a message that life offered a second chance, an opportunity to make amends for mistakes, and to seek a more genuine connection with the divine. Returning to my body was not a punishment, but an invitation to confront my imperfections, to look into the eyes of truth, and, finally, to embrace the vulnerability I feared so much. In this moment of recovery, I heard voices that tried to whisper secrets of what had been experienced. It was not just the voice of a distant God, but of a Jesus who, even in the midst of judgments and shadows, was present with unconditional love. This presence guided me, reminding me that, despite all the mistakes, there was still time to rewrite my story. Thus, between the fragility of my body and the strength of a new hope, I understood that the true miracle was not just in surviving, but in learning to love and forgive myself and others. Still recovering in that hospital room, the feeling of having experienced something extraordinary persisted intensely, but I soon realized that I was not alone. As the doctors and nurses took care of my vital signs, a dark presence seemed to infiltrate the quietest corners of the room. During the night, the faint hum of the devices mixed with almost imperceptible whispers, and I felt, with every fiber of my being, that something or someone did not want me to talk about what I had experienced. In the dim light of the corridor, when most of the patients were sleeping and the silence was absolute, I felt an inexplicable weight on my chest, as if a shadow was nestling next to my bed. The moments stretched on in suffocating tension. Sleep paralysis caused me to remain motionless, watching, even with heavy eyes, the darkness that seemed to be approaching. I remember calling on the name of Jesus in a trembling whisper. Jesus, protect me. It was then that I realized that that presence was not just a figment of my imagination. She moved silently, hovering near my bed, as if she wanted to take possession of my story and silence my truth. In an instant, a feeling of intense cold invaded the room, and the shadow seemed to merge with the walls, making the room vibrate with a dense, disturbing energy. If you talk about what you saw, you will lose everything. Low voices echoed, mixed with the whisper of the fans, threatening my silence. Terror gripped me. I found myself struggling not only with the physical frailty that still afflicted me, but also with this force that seemed determined to erase my experience. For hours, I was in a silent battle. My desire to expose the truth and the insistence of that evil presence that tried to suffocate every word I dared to form. The feeling was as if I were on an invisible battlefield, where every thought was ammunition and every sigh was an attempt to resist. In one of those moments of almost total paralysis, the shadow approached so close that I could feel its icy touch. My breathing became labored and tears began to fall silently down my face as I cried out with all the strength I had left. Please let me live. Don't lead me into this darkness. At that exact moment, the environment seemed to vibrate with an opposite energy. A faint light, appearing from a dark corner of the room, slowly grew, dispelling the evil presence that insisted on showing itself. I felt as if an invisible hand, but filled with love and compassion, was pushing me to get up and face that torment. The spiritual battle that was going on inside me, between light and shadow, intensified with every second. As I cried out the name of Jesus more firmly, the shadow retreated, as if the power of faith was raising a shield around me. The room, which moments before seemed filled with impenetrable darkness, began to lighten again. Although I still felt a chill down my spine and the weight of the internal battle, I realized that the victory was not complete. The shadow could return. But in that instant, I had proven that the light was capable of resisting. Every sigh, every silent prayer, served as a reminder that even in the midst of terror, I was not helpless. After the intense spiritual confrontations and bitter internal battle, time seemed to have condensed into a single instant of decision. Still weakened by the experience and the persistent echo of the voices that threatened me, I knew that my fate was sealed. I would have to face my congregation and reveal everything. Once the spiritual storm had passed, I was left with a new burden, that of exposing my truth, knowing that I would be judged and possibly rejected. On that gray morning, the Chicago temple was quieter than usual. The dense atmosphere reflected the turmoil that was boiling inside me. I walked slowly through the halls of the church, my footsteps echoing as a reminder of every decision made and every hidden sin. With each look of surprise and apprehension, I felt the weight of my choices, the inevitable approach of the moment of confession. I went up to the pulpit, where my words had so often inspired and calmed multitudes. However, today, every look on my face carried the expectation of a miracle or divine punishment. I took a deep breath, trying to collect the courage that seemed to have vanished during the fight with the shadow that had accompanied me. The silence was so palpable it could be cut with a knife, and at that moment, the congregation prepared to hear not an ordinary sermon, but the account of a naked soul. My beloved, today I come to you not as that unshakable shepherdess, but as a woman who faced the darkness and found herself faced with the truth, I declared in a trembling but resolute voice. Each word seemed carried with the weight of an eternity. As I spoke, tears insisted on streaming down my face, mixing with the sweat of redemption. I told without reservation about the moment when physical pain turned into a feeling of detachment, over the sight of my body, inert, while my soul witnessed the failure of the pride that I had cherished so much. I narrated the passage through the spiritual realm, the fight against the evil presence and the terrible accusation that echoed in my conscience. I never knew you. Every detail, every memory, was exposed as an act of vulnerability, an invitation for everyone to reflect on the true essence of faith. Between emotion and terror, I revealed the last appeal made to me on the threshold between life and death. I died, and Jesus showed me something I never wanted to see. My words, imbued with regret, seemed to pierce the veil that separated redemption from abandonment. The silence that followed was absolute, as members of the congregation absorbed every syllable. Some knelt, others cried, and in the midst of this intense reaction, I felt a release I had never experienced. I preached about repentance, but I never truly repented, I concluded, my voice echoing around the room like the last breath of a freed soul. The question I left hanging, "Do you really know God?" resonated as a challenge to everyone there, an invitation for everyone to turn within themselves and question their own truths. In that last sermon, I set aside the desire to maintain an impeccable image and embraced human imperfection, demonstrating that true ministry lies not in titles or positions, but in the courage to recognize one's flaws and seek the light even in the midst of darkness.